Welcome everyone to our session about new development tools. My name is Stanislaw Stempin. In English, it's just Stan. I'm the engineering lead for what we call internally Modern Dev Tools team, Modern Development Tools. And we have a lot of content for you here today. We will start with some basics, as not all of you might have seen VS Code before, so just to get everybody on the same page. And then we'll move into more advanced topics. So I'm very happy to see a very full room, probably even the second room, and I hope you'll enjoy the session.
Thank you. My name is Esben Kristoffersen. I'm the architect on the modern development team, and it has been a fantastic couple of years working on this project, so we are so happy to be here and present it.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm Jesper Schulz-Wedde, and opposed to Stan and Esben, I'm not part of the modern dev team. Instead, I'm an application developer, so I'm kind of on the same side as you guys are, a consumer of this new awesome technology. So about 14 months ago, I first encountered this new development toolset, and I've just loved it ever since. So a lot has happened since then, actually. It's amazing how quickly this develops. And so today I'm going to try to demo a handful of the latest innovations for you here on stage.
Okay, since you have had plenty of time to read the disclaimer, I will immediately get past that one. And start out with a picture of good old Seaside. And I promise you this will be the last time that I'll start a presentation with a picture of Seaside, because we are moving everything to VS Code. So, but a small walk down memory lane around history. I mean, Seaside, it's getting old. And while we moved the platform all the way from 2-tier to 3-tier, moved the client from web to devices, and the architecture from on-prem to hosted to cloud, we really didn't give a lot of love to Seaside. We added color coding, and everyone was, yeah, yes, we got it. 10, 15 years later than all the other products. And we added a new editor, but even so, when we introduced extensions, it was clear that, Seaside started to show its age. We couldn't really make Seaside do the things what we needed to do in order to make a good extension development experience. So we compiled a list, and God knows we had many years to actually think about this while still sitting with Seaside. So we created a list of stuff that we actually wanted to achieve with a new development experience. We wanted it to be state-of-the-art. We want a better development story for extensions, which was one of the primary drivers. And we, of course, also wanted to protect all the investments you have made into Seaside, AL, and NAV. And we wanted to be file-based. We want to get out of the database and allow you to use all standard tools for doing whatever things you want to do. And we wanted to be able to add features more quickly than we have ever been with Seaside. We want faster compile time, components in compiler, so that we can use it in a lot of places. We want to do that when you have a compiler. We want to be able to modularize, something that we have never been able to achieve with Seaside. And we want support for cloud deployment. And lastly, we actually also would really like to have a more broader appeal to modern developers. So, luckily, at the same time, actually, another group, Microsoft, started out a project called Visual Studio Code. And it's a simple but very powerful and extensible editor. They have a really, really great extensibility model that we have plugged into. And I actually know that some of the attendees here have already created their own extensions into Visual Studio Code. And it has a huge marketplace where a lot of people have created extensions, themes, and other stuff. It's a huge community. It's open source. It's on GitHub. And even better, it's actually free. So just download it after the session. So, enough about that. Now I'll turn to Jesper.
All right, let's get started.
Yep.
There we go. So basically all you need to do is to start Visual Studio Code. That was the wrong one, this one. The blue one, they change color every once in a while, it's a bit confusing. So then you end up in this empty view. Now, in order for Visual Studio Code to understand AL, you need to install an extension first. Where you can get that, where you can get the latest version, will be a part of later in the demo or in the presentation. But I have it already installed for sake of convenience. And when you click on it, you can get a few details. You can also get a list of all the new commands that it adds, all the new capability this adds to Visual Studio Code. Now, one of the most important ones being AL Go. That will get you started right away. So let's jump into it by hitting F1, for instance. You can just type AL Go. Then you have to choose the directory where you want to put your new extension. In my case, I'm going to put it into TechDays 2017. And that should get you started. So what it does now, it asks you where your server is. You can either choose the Cloud Sandbox or any other configuration that you might have. Now for this demo, I have it locally on my box. So I'm going to choose this configuration. And it generates a launch JSON for you, which Stan will explain in a minute, and an app JSON, and basically the first page extension for you to get you started. And you're up and running.
So this might be a lot to take in for someone who saw VS Code for the first time and the AL extension for the first time. So let's take it step by step. So what you can see here, in the left top corner, you have a list of all the files that are in your folder. And you might have noticed that we don't actually open a project in VS Code, we just open a folder. So in that case, we just created a new folder. And this is a philosophy behind VS Code, where it doesn't operate on project files, it operates on folders. And then each extension can decide what the folder really means. So in our case, we decided that if a folder contains a file called app.json, it means that this is AL language package, extension, or project. And this file contains the name of your extension, the publisher name, version, and all the details necessary to publish to app source. It doesn't contain a list of files. The list of files is simply what is in the folder. Then we have a couple of other JSON files. As you can see, they are placed under .vs code folder, and that means they are system files related to VS Code. And launch.json contains all the connection details necessary to connect to the server. So this is what you saw Jesper selecting from the dropdown. Depending on which option you select, you'll get different content in that file. And depending on how you do your development, you should not be adding this file to source control, because you might be developing against different servers, and then there is no point in sharing the connection details. And lastly, we have the settings JSON file. And here is where you store VS Code specific settings and any settings specific to AL language extension or any other extensions that you have installed. This is also a file that you might check it in if you have settings for the project, but it might also contain settings specific to your user. So there is a lot of JSON files. And if you're not familiar with JSON, we have a formal notation for JSON, and it fits on one page. So this is probably the simplest spec we have for any open standard file format. And it's very simple. So actually, JSON contains of dictionaries of names and values, and it also can have a list. So in a square bracket, you see a basically ordered array, and that's really it. And on the value type, you can have string type, Boolean type, or a nested dictionary. So it's a very simple type, very readable, and it's used all over Visual Studio Code, and we also try to leverage as much as possible. So now back to Jesper, and we'll continue the demo.
All right, so let's continue where we left off. So in the in the conference guidelines, it kind of states that on-stage coding is a really bad idea, so that's what I'm going to try to do. First of all, let me give you a little bit of context and set the stage here. So in our normal NAV product, we already have integrated a functionality which is called translations, which is basically just a place where you can add translations for the product description. Now this is very, very manual, and you'll very quickly hit the wall when you don't speak a language. So, but for Danish, I could fill it out, of course, sort knallert. But then if I wanted to do it in Flemish or something else, well, then I would have to go into another product. So, as Vincent quickly touched upon, we have this, in the keynote, we have this lovely Microsoft Translator service. So I'm going to try to make a lightweight implementation where we actually consume this Microsoft Translator text API within NAV to translate the description. So let's get to it. First of all, let's create a new folder. That's just good style, source. And then we move our source code into that folder. I'm going to scrap this one. So I'm going to do some snippet coding today in order not to make too many typos. But first of all, we need an item translation extension. Also, we should probably rename our file. No, that was wrong. That one. So the naming convention is usually that we write the ID of the page that we're extending, then we write the ID of the page of the actual extension, and then the name. Now the name is not chosen very wisely here, but this is just for the sake of this demo, to keep it easy. All right, so once we have our extension, we can add the action that we'd like to. So in the action section, I'm going to add as first in the processing section the translate now action. This is the caption of the action. I want to show it in these application areas. Might also choose all. I want it to be promoted and big, obviously. I need a nice icon for it. Yeah, so that's about it. Now we need to hook it to logic for this to be fun. So I'll add a trigger, the onAction trigger. And in here, for now, for this stage, I'm only adding the description translation logic is missing onto the... so let's try to publish this one. Let's see where that takes us. So if I now go into translations, I have my lovely little button, which I can hit, and it says translation logic is missing. So that was that.
Yeah. So what did we just see here? We saw Visual Studio Code with a new AL language extension. We saw an app being deployed to a Dynamic 365. That could be in Azure, that could be on-prem. In this case, it was on-prem. And a simple page extension. The page extension is one of the new objects that we added that allows you to describe a difference to an existing page, add some code, and in that way augment an existing page with new functionality without disturbing other changes to that page. So how does this all works? First of all, VS Code is no longer, it's not like C-side, it's not connected to the database. It's connected to a service. So what happens when you press Control F5 is actually that we do a packaging and a compile step inside VS Code in the compiler locally. And when we have done that, wrapped it in a nice package, we send it over to the service. The service then unpacks it and compiles it. Again, now actually create some binary artifacts that in the end get stored in the database. And now it's actually ready to be run from the clients. So for deployment options, you saw them before, happens immediately after Jesper he actually created the ALGO project. You are asked which service should I connect to? And you have two options. You have the Microsoft Cloud Sandbox, which is a sandbox managed by Microsoft. And basically the other one could be named all other configurations, because if you are connecting to a server that you are managing, either if you have put it in a cloud in a container or you have it locally, it's the other option. And it's, as Jesper also mentioned, it's controlled by the launch.json file. So, what does it give you? You cannot see the database, you cannot see all the other objects, you cannot see the customer table, the customer card, item, whatever, from your extension, because you do not see the database like Seaside did. So to get around that, we added a way of conveying symbolic information for a service to the client. So actually, when you see this, this info or warning up here is that VS Code is not aware of the symbols for your service. Please download it. So it contacts the service that you specified in launch.json and actually pulls down the symbols for the platform and the app that you actually have specified. Puts it down, puts it locally, and now the compiler can suddenly see all the tables, all the pages, all the methods that you have created in your code units, and give you, first of all, compile against it, but also provide nice, rich intelligence about all this. So, the way it looks right now is that we have, at the lowest level, called the platform level, we have a package called system. That one today contains all the system tables, which is coupled to the platform. So it's all the various tables, the user tables, things like that. And on top of that, we have the application. And today it's W1, it's US, it's GB, whatever. And on top of all that, we have the apps. And the apps can depend on the platform, the application, but they can also depend on another module. I mean, if you, as I mentioned before, you can modulize your code, so you can have apps that depend on other apps or modules. A lot of terms for the same thing. And this is how we see it right now. But imagine, in the future, coming soon, we will have the ability to have many more modules that you can have reference. I mean, today we have some parts of the application which actually have bigger affinity to the platform than to the application. Think about user management. Today it's actually pages that comes with the platform. No, that comes with the application, but it should belong with the platform. So we want to make this distinction. And longer term, you can imagine that we actually modularized the app and made it easier to pick. I only need finance. That's the only thing I depend on for my application. So this is how we see the future going for this modularization. It will take a while, but this is the direction we're heading in.
So now let's go back to the actual code and recap of what we've seen on the screen. So a few words about the syntax. As you can see, we tried to keep the syntax very similar to CAL. So as Esben mentioned, we are trying to protect your existing investments, make it as easy as possible to migrate the code to the new development tools. So even though the language is new, the compiler is new, we tried to make it very easy to migrate existing code. So anything you see between begin and end block, this is pretty much the same as you've seen in Seaside. There are a few small differences. We tried to make it look a little bit more modern. So all the keywords are lowercase, and method calls are Pascal-cased instead of uppercasing everything. So this is not enforced, but this is the convention that we'll be sticking to in our internal code, and we'll be presenting also coding guidelines externally. Then another difference you might notice is that now all the variables are actually visible right above the procedure. So it's very easy to see what is the list of variables and what is your current working set. The procedure declaration pretty much didn't change. We also made a little bit cosmetic alignments, and the spacing will be different, and the formatter that we ship will be different. Formatting is slightly differently than Seaside. So this is code. Now what about metadata? In Seaside, we had a lot of grid-based views, which were used to present the metadata like properties, fields, table fields. Now that we are fully code-based, we had to find some way to present it in a consistent and readable way. So the metadata was already present in the TXT files. If you export the file from object from Seaside, you would get the TXT format, but it was never optimized for readability. But it also contained all the necessary details. So we took that format and we changed it to be more readable and human editable. So this is an example of a code unit. This is the simplest object in terms of metadata. And you can see that on top we have the object properties, then followed by variables, triggers, and methods. And this ordering will be enforced by the compiler, and this will be consistent across all objects. So you will see this in pages, tables, reports. It's always properties first, then object-specific section, and then the code. So for example, this is another object type. This is table. It's hard to see on the screen. So table has fields and keys, and this is the table specific section, but it's all structured in the same way, and it all looks like a list, even though it's code. So here are a few other objects. As you can see, the same pattern, but we don't follow the same approach only for objects, also for sub-elements. So here you can see a page field, and it also follows the same pattern, that we have properties first and then the triggers. But okay, you might still not be convinced. Seaside had a lot of designers. So where are my designers now? So Seaside had a table designer, page designer, another page designer for actions. They're not really that different, but they were very convenient. So we are aware that the approach changes now from very visual approach to pretty much starting with a blank screen. And it can be pretty scary at the beginning. How do I even get started? And how do people very familiar with Seaside get started with a blank page? So we are aware of this, and we did a lot of improvements, or took advantage of a lot of features in VS Code to make it very easy to get started. So first of all, we made sure the layout resembles a grid layout. So it's still a familiar view. It's not that different. But then we made sure it's very easy actually to know what you can type in which context. So we added a structural keyword IntelliSense, and that means that in every place in the object, so wherever you put your cursor and press Ctrl space, which triggers IntelliSense, you will always get the list of keywords that are possible in that context. So that makes it very easy to know, am I in the right place to start writing variables, or is this a place for table keys? This list will always be filtered to what is allowed in the given context. So you can do what's called the programming by IntelliSense, pretty much keep pressing Ctrl space, select the option that fits, and then fill out the data part. Another feature is signature help. In Visual Studio and C#, this is used only for providing help for methods, but we took advantage of this feature in VS Code to also help you write the structural things like fields on tables, keys, field groups, so you'll get help on exactly what is expected after typing the field keyword, or after selecting the field keyword from IntelliSense. Then another thing is that even though we don't have a property sheet right now, you will see the full list of properties also after pressing Ctrl space. And that list will be filtered down only to the properties that haven't been populated yet. So it will keep shrinking the more properties you select. And lastly, this is to get you started from a completely blank slate we added a lot of snippets. And these snippets they will create a completely new object from scratch and let you just fill out the details. So we have snippets for pages, tables. We have snippets also for sub-elements. So you can create the table key just by writing T key, enter, and then again fill out the details, in many cases using IntelliSense. So now there is another part that we haven't mentioned is that even though most things are done in code, there are some things that we know require a visual designer. So if you've seen in the keynote, we have one designer for now that we'll demo, and a nicely integrated flow.
Yes. So back to our little extension here. So the Microsoft Translation Service requires a 2-letter language code. Now, unfortunately, we only have 3-letter language codes. So what we need to do is that we need to extend our table here, or our page, with a 2-letter language code. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and we create a table extension which extends the language table. And then we add our 2-letter code field, which is a code 2, and that basically does it. So now, if I hit F6, I will launch. Let me just try. Yeah, here I will launch the client in designer mode already. So let's go to the page that we wanted to add the field to. Under translations, select from full list. And now this is the page. So now we go into more, and we say we want to add a field here. And as you can see now, our 2-letter code that we just added is present. So we can now drag it into the column where we would like it to be, for instance here. And then we can also quickly do the check if it looks all right in all the other client types. That doesn't pollute our phone client, for instance. So when we're done, we say stop designing, and we save it. And we go back into Visual Studio Code, and by hitting F7, our page extension shows up. So I'm just going to move it into the right folder. Going to give it the right name, like that. And then also we can, because the formatting is not always correct, we can use the auto-formatting function. Blam, there we go. And that way you can format back and forth, or transfer the code back and forth.
So a little bit more details on what happened here. So as you saw, the designer is integrated with VS Code. But how does it know that this is this specific set of objects to download back to the extension? So that happens through extension context. So right now, there might be a lot of shortcut keys to remember, but we deploy with Ctrl F5. And then if you press F6, it also deploys, but now it deploys in the extension context and opens the designer. So we pass an additional parameter, the extension GUID, and that opens the designer linked to that specific package. I'll put it away. And that opens the designer in a mode linked to this extension, and it knows that all changes that are made on the server should be saved within that exact package. And then we press F7 in VS Code, and then again it passes the same parameter to the server and knows to download only changes from that extension. So it's good to remember what happens exactly there, because there is a chance that you might have changes in both places. So you need to be careful when you press F7, as this overrides the changes from the server. We'll have 15 minutes at the end.
So, next topic is a bit about developing for the cloud. First of all, you're not alone in the cloud. And even though that sounds comforting, it's not without challenges. In the cloud, the resources are shared, which means that one tenant with a lot of traffic or maybe even poorly written code can disturb other tenants. So what we need to make sure that this is not happening is resource governance. Resource governance requires us to have a good chance of actually monitoring what is going on. And And another thing that we need to ensure in the cloud is that data is not shared. And for that, we need to be able to sandbox each tenant so they cannot touch each other's data. And that's sort of what is needed. That, unfortunately, for the development side of it, requires us to add some restrictions when you are deploying to a cloud service. So we took away some of the platform APIs, and we know you have all noticed, all of you who have tried to work with VS Code, noticed that for extensions there's certain things which are not allowed. For instance, the file APIs. We had to take them away because the file system on the service is a place where you can actually bring down a server. So those we had to take away. We are considering how to introduce them in another form, but for now they are blocked. And similar, there's parts of the application which is merely wrapping .NET Interop, for instance, and some of those code units are potentially unsafe, so we had to block those as well. And our first attempt, we were probably a lot on the cautious side, and as all of you who had followed us on GitHub, we are taking requests for opening up for some of those blocked APIs, but for now, some of them are blocked and will keep being blocked. And the last thing is that we do not support .NET Interop in the cloud. We will bring back the feature, but not for the cloud. So what did we do to help you? Because we know we gave you this great tool, .NET Interop, a number of years ago, and you have used it for so many things. But luckily, there was a huge overlap. We looked in our own code base and noticed that, more than 80% of the usages of .NET was actually coincidentally the same as the 80% most usages when we asked you. So we took that list and say, okay, we'll fix those. We will add them to the AL language so they become native to the language. So on that list is, we needed JSON support. We needed XML. And now I'll skip a bit ahead and mention the HTTP client support we added, because those go hand in hand. In order to call external services, you need a combination of those. The TextBuilder is also something that many have asked for, and I shall be the first to admit that string manipulation within AL has never been that fast or that rich, but we added TextBuilder as a native type. And then we have added lists and dictionaries in a generic form. Not everything can be used as the generic part of it, but the basic types, everything you can return from a function can be used. And then we added some additional string functions. And that helps in all the 80% cases. So there's still some left. And one of the solutions is to take those and move those pieces of .NET code into Azure functions where they can be sandboxed, and then use the JSON, XML, HTTP client in combination to actually invoke the methods over there. And the last option for now is that you can submit a pull request to the OpenCL library on GitHub. And as long as we can provide it in a safe form, the functionality you need, we will try to build that into the base app and allow you to call it through a base API. So I'll take a chance and use this one. So for JSON, this is a small sample of some JSON I would like to create. And if we look at the code, how it looked like in C-side, and I have even abbreviated a bit because some of the lines were very long. Lots of code to create this small sample. If we look at the similar code using the new native methods, it's more condensed and way shorter. Looks better. Similar story for XML, almost the same sample. Lots of code. That was even worse to create that. If we look at how it looks now, a lot smaller, a lot nicer. So there's clearly some goodness in this. For the text builder, I created a small sample here, tried to build up a big string using the text type, or using big text, or even and using TextBuilder at the end. And I ran that on a Surface Pro, and this one took 25 seconds. Slightly faster to use big text. I'm not sure why it's even that slow, but not impressive. With a text builder, it took 72 milliseconds. So huge performance gains. And for the text functions, these are basically now using fluent syntax. You can do text.contains rather than call a static method. And there's a list here, and there's some additional ones. I won't go through all of them. And lastly, we have the generic types. So dictionaries and lists, just put them up here so you know they are there, and you can find documentation about it and use them. So now I'll hand it over to Jesper again, and we'll do some demo.
Yes. And we're back. So now let's put these awesome new types to work. So as I mentioned, the Microsoft Translator Service is a REST API, which conveniently enough gives us the opportunity to use the HTTP type. And also that service returns its results in XML, which is also one of the new types. So let me show you how to actually hook up our little extension to this translator service. So first of all, we need a new code unit to hold all our logic. Now this code unit I call translation management. It has a function translate, which takes an input text and then language code, 2-letter, and returns something translated. This token management you can disregard. This is just for some security that we need here. So first of all, let's construct the URL. For that we will need, or we will use the text builder that Esben just demoed or showed. So first we take the URI of the Microsoft Translator Service, and then we append the input text as parameter 1. For this demo, the from language is hard-coded to English, and the language code is whatever we put into this function. So next we should probably go over and actually hook this function into our call. So where before we had the translation logic is missing, now we can actually go over and add this code unit. Also, we need the language because we need to retrieve the language. We need the item because we need the description from it. So I've also added these two variables. And this part we will replace with the actual call to the translate function. Now if I hover over it, you can see again the parameter list that we need. And we're going to input the item description and the 2-letter code. So this should hook it up nicely. So we can go back here. Next, we actually need to call this URL. So for that, we need the new HTTP client type. Also, we need the HTTP response message, which is the response we're getting back. And then eventually, we will put the contents of this into a stream. So code-wise, this looks a little something like this. First, we need to add a request header, which is the authentication part. Next, again, if you hover over it, you can see what parameters it accepts. So it needs the path where it can get the call the GET request, and then it will put our result into the response. Now, from this response, we can read the content into the content in stream. Now, as I said, this content in stream now contains an XML document. So if we want to get our translation out of that, we need the XML type. So we both have the XML document and the node which contains our information. So let's try to get our, oops, like this. Oops, sorry about that. So by calling XML document read from, we can pass in an in-stream, and it will convert it into a XML document. Out of this XML document, we can retrieve our child nodes. In this case, we know that, or I know that the first, actually the first node contains our translation. So we're going to extract the first node. Now we have our node, and out of that node, we can retrieve the inner text, which actually is the translation itself. So that should actually do it. Let's try. Hitting F5. And we're back to our black moped. So if I now, first of all, of course, I need to provide the two-letter language code. So I quickly need to add that. If we actually, let's take Dutch Belgian. I believe the two-letter code for that is NL. So now if we hit translate now, it says Zwarte Bromfiets, which I think is the right translation. So yeah, that's about that.
Yeah, and of course, even, I mean, Jesper used snippets, so of course it's completely flawless. But when you are doing development, sometimes those nasty little pesky things get in there, which are called bugs. And I know that we once tried to ship a version without a debugger, and we are not going to make that mistake again. So we have actually created a debugger for you, and Jesper will now demonstrate that.
Yes. So personally, of course, I never use the debugger because I write bugless code. But for the rest of you, actually it is very much like debuggers that you know from other products. So for the sake of this demo, let me add one more little call. So I'm using here the permission manager code unit, which is actually in the base app. And then if it is a sandbox configuration, I do not want to waste my precious translation thingies. So I will exit out of it. So let's go into our action and actually place a breakpoint here in the very beginning of our action trigger. And hit F5. So again, quickly, I need to add this one language code. I can also add it up here for the sake. For Danish, it's DA. Okay. And if I now hit translate now, you can see it starts flashing down here. So I can go into my debugger. It has now halted on our first breakpoint. I can go into the debug view here. And I can see my global variables in all the fields and whatnot. I can add watches. I can see my local variables. And as I single step my way through my code, you can see the values changing. I can also step into my methods or procedures by hitting F11. And now, actually, when I step into a function that is not part of my extension, it did something weird. Sorry, I just didn't hit the button, I guess. So here we are in actually the code unit from the base app, where you can now also single step your way through and exit false. And we're back into our extension. So yeah, that's a pretty powerful tool in case you ever write a bug.
So what have we just seen here? So the debugger uses the same endpoint as the deployment mechanism. So what that means is that we use HTTP connection also for debugging. And that's another case where VS Code is such a great platform for us, because we just implemented the debugging protocol that VS Code offers out of the box. So we didn't have to spend time implementing any of the UI, any of the controls stepping into, stepping through. We had to implement the protocol and make sure the server returns the right data and populates all the data structures and provides the control flow. So what happens with debugging is that we create a unique debugging context every time you press F5. That's also a GUID. And then on the server, we start a session and place all the breakpoints within the debugging context. And this communication happens over HTTP, and it establishes a bidirectional signal-out connection. So it's based on WebSockets and means the server can transmit messages back to our VS Code client. And then at the same time, we start the web client with the same debugging context. And this is how the web client then knows, or the server knows, that it has to connect this particular web client session with this particular debugging session. So the breakpoints are matched only in the context of this one session. So with C-side, you could only debug one session for the whole server. And obviously, this won't work for cloud sandboxes where you might have multiple people debugging at the same time. So this is how we make sure that it's only debugging within a unique session. So the benefits of this approach are that, first of all, you can do many debugging sessions on the same server, which we want to enable on the cloud sandboxes. But what it also means is that you can do remote debugging. So you don't have to do any additional work to actually do remote debugging against a different machine. It doesn't have to be a local setup. It's all HTTP based and all based on the same protocol. So you can have all kinds of setup where you just can connect to your colleague's box and debug their deployment. So if you remember the symbols and modules diagram that Esben showed, there was a talk about module dependencies. And we can actually already do that now. So it's technically possible to break down your app into separate modules. And this will be a natural step when your app becomes bigger. Yes, you can build and debug and test a single module, but over time you'll have some reusable pieces that also just within your extension you want to break out. So you can already do this now by using the dependencies section in app.json. You simply point to another extension. So you have to have the GUID of another extension, and you add it as a dependency to your final extension. It's also supported in app source, so you can submit library extensions that are then reused by many other extensions. And it all works it works on the same mechanism as coding against the base app. Each extension generates symbols. So as soon as you compile your extension, it generates inside the package a symbol description for everything that is in this package. That means it can be consumed by other extensions. It's very similar to DLLs. So you can treat apps as assemblies and have other things that take dependency on it. So one good thing of what you might want to put in a dependency as a library is a control add-in. And Esben will show an example of that.
Yep. The control add-in or client add-ins, as any of you who have tried to actually create one of those knows that it's a 3-page description how to do it. You first write an interface in C# describing the protocol between the control add-in and C-side, and you compile it, sign it, make sure that C-side can actually see this assembly, so you now get some IntelliSense or at least some compile validation against that controller then. And then you can start writing your JavaScript code in another place. And at the end, you will have to take all this and package it together and zip it and copy it around a bit. It's a very long description. So we thought we could do a bit better. Can I get this one? Yeah. And probably forgot to mention in the beginning that VS Code is cross-platform, and we are working on the cross-platform implementation of the EL compiler. We have it running, it's not shipped, but we are getting very close, and close enough to use it. So this is a small example where I have some EL code here describing a controller then. This is the new object type, the new syntax for creating a controller again. It's a combination of the interface you used to create in C# and the manifest that you have to create along with it. And as you can see, we have reused the mechanisms that we have already. we have properties in the beginning describing the scripts that you need to include, any style sheets that you want to have include, images, some other properties, and then you have the ability to describe procedures that you can call if you want to call something inside JavaScript, and callbacks, which are the ability for JavaScript to call back into AL. So, and the way you use it is like this. I modify, in this case, the customer card, and I add after the blocked field a user control, has to have a name, and then I refer to my add-in that I just created. And in this case, what it actually gives you is validation. So if I change the name here, it actually tells me now that the callback without the K is not found in the target. So let me quickly add this one back. So as you can see, a way better integration between the interface and the code you write around it. But together in the same folder structure here, I actually also have my style sheet. So I can go in here, I get all the nice benefits of VS Code. There's a nice color editor here. It's a bit, create a blue background instead. So, and also here I have an image I would like to include, and I have some JavaScript code here. And actually, the interesting thing is that we have IntelliSense in here, because VS Code knows that this is a JavaScript file, so it actually provides IntelliSense. So, remember the long list of all the stuff you need to do on a line to make it run in a client? What I need to do here is basically just to do Control F5. I will build it, deploy it, in this case to Azure. Can log in, and here I have my add-in I just created, and you can see the far color I picked was sort of purplish. And down here I can call this button. That one will call back into AL, get some values back, present it. Or I can actually also go here to the actions, and I can call the JavaScript, and that means I get some values put back here. It's a way nicer experience than the one we had before. So I'm pretty sure you're going to like it.
So now for completeness, we want to mention there's a lot of other embedded resources that you can include in Extensions v2. And this is also now easier in the new tooling. Essentially, we support all the same things that you could do in v1. So you can include permission sets, you can include translation files, extension table data. So you can prepackage some setup data, configuration data, or demo data. And you can have web service definitions and custom report layouts. So we kept the way to obtain these things work the same as in v1. So most of the resources are achieved through PowerShell. So you connect to your normal development server, run the PowerShell commands, and the files you get, you can put them in the same format as you did in v1. Just drop them in the folder in your VS Code project, and they will be automatically recognized by the compiler and packaged, deployed to the server. So you don't have to do any additional configuration, any additional plumbing. Just simply drop these files next to anywhere in your project folder. And as you can see on the screenshot here, we have Danish localization TXT, permission set XML, tenant web services XML, and some service setup data. But as you can see, for translations, it's not a PowerShell commandlet, it's still a C-side command. So how does that fit into the new development tools? It really doesn't. And the only reason we have to use C-side is that translations are part of the source code in the base application. So can we solve that actually in Extensions v2? Yes, we can. So we have new approach to translations, which is translations are no longer part of source code. And we also introduced a new syntax in AL language to handle the new captions. So you'll be able to use both, but you won't be able to mix them in the same object. But this is the new way to use translations. It's very similar to the previous approach, but you can add more metadata to it in a nice structured way with IntelliSense support. So as you can see, caption is just a text, and this will be text. This is text for developers, so this is not translated in any language. This is what you should put there to understand what the caption should be about, and this is the text used in development. You can also include a comment, now in a structured way, not as a curly brace interjection, and you can add now maximum length. And actually, why do we have maximum length now? This is because the output that we generate based on the new syntax is an xlib file, which means that whenever you compile your extension now, we will generate an xlib file. And what is an xlib file? So xlib file is a most commonly used translation format. It's an open standard. It has around, we could find at least 50 tools supporting that standard. So now we are getting questions of which tool is the recommended one by Microsoft. There's definitely a lot to choose from. And this approach lets you now decouple your translations completely from source code. So you can send the files to translation vendor, you can use open source tooling to do the translations yourself. And again, it works in a very intuitive, simple way that the files get generated by the compiler and then automatically recognized and included back. So this also solves a problem where source code was OEM encoded, and you couldn't really import translations in different code pages into the same source code. So Jesper now will show actually how easy it is to do these translations, how it works in the practice.
Yes. That's actually going to be my shortest demo because it's really, really easy. You open the app JSON file and you add a little parameter in here, which is called features translation file. Now if I save this one and I rebuild my extension, it will create a translation folder with an xlib file in it. This xlib file is now the file that we actually need for translation. So in this case, I would like to create, for instance, a Danish translation file. The source language is English. I then need to specify the target language in here. I can also, of course, do that through the tools, as Stan mentioned, but me being a hardcore developer, I'll just do it right in here in the XML file. So if that would be Denmark, it would be DADK, I guess. And then you can see here my little extension only has two captions. It has the translate now caption for the button, and it has the 2-letter code from the table. So now if I wanted to add a translation, all I would have to do in here is to do target, and then the Danish translation, overset nu, and finish it. And now when I compile it, this translation file is included in my extension, and it will then speak Danish. And of course, as Dan mentioned, we could also go in and use one of the online tools. Some of them are free, some of them cost money. Some of them want to use you as an advertisement thingy, where they want your Twitter account and Facebook and whatnot. And so be a little bit cautious when choosing it. But basically, they all are about the same. You open the xlib file and you say start translating, and you then get the captions, and then you add your translations in here, and then you generate your new xlib file with the translations. So yeah, that's what's that.
Yep. Next thing up is menu suites. The menu suite object is, as it is, going away. I mean, it was built to support a navigation structure that I believe was introduced with Outlook XP or something back in the 90s. So it doesn't really fit the cloud and new navigation modules. So we haven't defined exactly how we want to do this for web. So for now, we have staged this into phases. We still know that there's a need to be able to add, and that was one of the things that the menu suite did. You want to add to search, so you can search a page and find it. And basically, we want to enable that pages and reports can light up in search, so you can find them. And the way you do it is actually a couple of new properties that you add to the page or to the report that you want to show up. You want to have shown up in search. So there's a usage category already there in the corresponding menu suite item. And then there's the ability to restrict when it's seen. And then there's an application area. All those are the same properties that you found in the menu suite. By doing this and compile the page, it will show up in search. Another new thing, Thomas mentioned that as well in the keynote, is the install experience. So we have added a new subtype to code units called install, which gives you two new triggers, uninstall app per company and uninstall app per database. And in there you have now a number of options to actually test against the app version, the data version, and test dependencies, and make conditional behavior based on that. And that is something that Jesper now will demonstrate.
Yes. So this will be my final demo. Let's extend our extension with an installer and some settings. So first of all, I will create a little folder here to group my things a little. And then I will go ahead and create a settings table. Like this. So my settings table basically only holds the URL, because if previously I had hard-coded, what if it changes? It would make sense to have it in a setup table, right? And then we also, that was wrong. Then we also need a page to show this. So this page that I just created has the translation settings as the source table. It's a card page, and it shows our URL. Now if I compile and launch this, then apparently it did not work right now. Let me try again. Alright, sorry about that. Not sure what's going on here. I will just call it something else. Apparently there's still a little leftover from another demo. Translation settings 2. I'm going to do the same over here. Oh, I of course also need to update the reference. Well, actually this would have been a splendid opportunity for me to use the renaming functionality. Actually, if you want to rename a variable, you can use the F2 button. Let me try to go back and see if it actually still can do that. You can mark your variable, and then you can do an F2, and then do the renaming, and it will actually update all the references will automatically for you, which is quite powerful. So let's see if that does it. Please. Sweet. So right now, if I look for translation settings, there's nothing in there. So let's add those properties that Esben talked about. So by saying that this is an administration type, and we define the application area, it will now be visible in our menu suite. Translation settings, here we are. So, but it would be very convenient if we actually would have some default values in there so that we don't have to type the URL every time. So let's try to create one of these lovely installation code units. So for that, I'll create this code. I should probably give it another ID. Sorry, that was the wrong one. So now I've created a code unit. Did I? That on-stage coding actually is challenging. All right, here we go. So the subtype install actually makes this code unit an installer code unit. And now we have certain triggers at our disposal. One is the uninstalled app per company, one is uninstalled app per database. So in this case, I'm going to use per company because the other table that I want to populate is a per company table. Begin end. And then I would like to update my settings. So I have the translation settings, which is now called translation settings 2, which I init, I set the URL, and I insert the value. And then also I would like to add a few languages, these 2-letter language codes that I don't always have to go in and manually set them. So I'm going to add Flemish and German in this case. So now in this uninstall app company trigger, we should call these 2 functions that we just created. Update languages and update our translation settings. And then last but not least, for completeness, we should also hook in the new settings page. Yeah, that was probably this one. So the translation settings, which I again call translation settings 2 in this case. And then instead of actually using the hard-coded one, we will use, oops. A bit too many snippets here. Like that. So we retrieve the translating settings and then we set it over here. So let's try to run this and see what happens. So now, if I go into my translation settings page, it's pre-populated. And if I now would go in and say, I want to create a German translation, because now the 2-letter language code should already have been pre-populated, it says, Moped Schwarz. So yeah, that completes this little extension. Now we have automated translation capability.
Back to slides. So once we have a new compiler, what can you do with it? So there are many things we could do. For example, build new objects. And this is exactly what we did. And we built a profile object. So I was advised against using animations, but I like this just too much. So enter profile object. This is a completely new concept. Well, not a concept, but completely new object in AL language. It doesn't exist in CAL. And it replaces the XML-based profile approach with a strongly typed object with IntelliSense and all the editor candy that supports editing in VS Code. So what the profile object does is it links a role center and a set of page customizations to a given persona, to a given role, so you can set it up. The benefit of having this as profile objects is also that you can add them to source control and treat it as code. So as you might notice, we have a page customization object, and before you saw page extension. So why do we have a different object there? The reason is that there are a couple of reasons. So first reason is that we don't allow any code, any triggers, any variables on page customizations. This is purely for customizing the UI and adjusting based on the user that views the page, how the page looks like. And you can, the nice thing is now this is code. This is no longer configuration files, this is actual part of your extension. So you install the extension that contains the profile, and that links all the page customization objects with that specific profile, and you will only see the changes to the page if you actually connect the user with that specific profile. And you get all the benefits from the extension technology, meaning that it's also a declarative approach, intention-based approach, and you can use, not right now, but in the future, you'll be able to use Designer to also design the individual customizations. What you can do today is you can create a page extension object and just change it to a page customization, link it to a profile. So it's based all on the same underlying technology and makes it very easy to manage the customizations and profiles. So you might be thinking that this is all nice, but you are working with CAL, with Seaside, and all your code currently is on the old syntax. So how are these new things relevant? And actually, it is very relevant because we provide a set of tools to easily convert your existing solutions to the new world. So there are two important things here. One is that, as you have seen, even though there were not that many syntax changes, there are some important syntax changes that only Seaside can make, because they are based actually on symbolic information. So we added a new command to FinSQL, and you start by exporting your existing sources. So you just log into Seaside as usual, export your sources using the new command, and that gives you a slightly modified export format where we fix dates, where they are no longer locale specific, they are following ISO format. We fix all the quoting. So one important thing to learn in the new language, or in the new flavor of the language, is that single quotes are string literals, and identifiers always have to be double quoted, even in properties. So that was not visible in Seaside. It auto-corrected, so you never had to pay attention to it. And then the next step is you run the TXT to AL conversion tool. And that tool, it will take all your base objects, so pages, tables, code units, but it will also handle delta files and actually generate page extension and table extension objects. So you can start with customized base, and it will generate, to the degree possible, page extensions and table extensions from it, and get you as close to an extension as possible. So of course what the tool won't do is it won't rewrite .NET interop code into the new types. This is something you have to do yourself. And also it won't change the architecture to event-based. So this is also something that has to be done manually before actually becoming a full extension. And we have certain recommendations that you can do to make sure that as much code as possible is actually automatically convertible, and then treat the rest manually whenever you need to convert. So essentially you should take all the .NET interop code and try to put it in a separate code unit, and only call it from the remaining code. That means that you can then auto-convert all the remaining code and maintain 2 copies of the .NET interop code. One is in the V2 syntax using the new types, and one in the old syntax using the .NET interop. So once you move the code, we also give you possibility to upgrade the data. So this is a set of both a new upgrade code unit with upgrade triggers, but as you can see, it actually uses the old, or the V1 NAV app APIs. So you can load data in your new extension from the existing tables, V1 tables, and migrate them to the new data sources. And this is important also for app source. So if you have V1 app source apps, you can use this approach to upgrade the data to V2 app. On-premise, if you're migrating tables on-premise, you would have to do basically manually transfer the data to the new data structures. So there's another aspect to this. One is migrating your code to the new technology, but you might also be thinking that, okay, what does it have to do with on-prem development? Since this is all about extensions and apps, how is this relevant if I'm working only with on-prem customers? And we have very good news here. You might have heard already, but all the modern dev tools are shipping with NAV 2018. So everything that you see in the dev preview and the latest updates will be shipping in NAV 2018. And to that effect, we started making installer changes. So you will see a new component popping up in the installer, which is modern development environment. And this will install the extension on disk, and then you can just install it in VS Code, and the rest will be set up for you. So there are some new configuration options. First of all, the installer will now open the dev services port on the on-premise instances. And this is defaulted to false on production installations, but if you select developer option, this will be defaulted to true. So there's no more configuration required other than selecting developer option in the installer. And then you have a set of, this tab is all the new settings we've added over the last year to the server. You might notice a setting here called allowed extension target level. And this is set to internal. And what does it mean is that if you're developing for on-prem, you're actually not bound by any limitations that are applied to the cloud. So you can use file APIs, you can use all the restricted code units, and once .NET Interop is there, you can actually also use .NET Interop. Another setting is enable loading application symbol references at server start. That's quite a long name. But what it means is that you can use symbols from C-side for V2 development, for modern dev development. And let me show you what this enables. So here is, you see it? So I'm in C-side, I'm connected to NAV 2018 server, and I want to add a new event to the customer card. Because maybe as part of your refactoring to V2, you need to add a new event. So here, let's see if I can subscribe to this event. So here you can also see how IntelliSense helps with discovering events. So these are the currently available events on page 21, on the page that I want to modify in C-side. And right now I don't see the new event that I'm about to add. But then in C-side, simply go to the object, go to the code for the object. And we add my new event publisher. And then make it a publisher. And I'm fine with the defaults. And then I simply save the object and compile the object. And I go back to VS Code, find the command for downloading symbols, and without having, okay. Sorry about that. I'm running a Docker and it seems like the DNS name expired. Okay, seems like I cannot use my domain credentials here. So in this case, what would happen if I could connect to the server is that a new event would show up on this list. And the way it happens is that, first of all, you enable the new setting on the server for loading symbols at startup. And then you have to run C-side with a new switch, generate symbol references set to yes. And that means that every time you compile an object in C-side, it actually generates symbols only for that specific file and refreshes the whole package that's downloaded from VS Code. So that means you can do seamless side-by-side development between C-side and VS Code. So back to Esben.
Yeah. So testability. We're not all of us as perfect as Jesper, so we make mistakes, and when we do, we like to write a test, so we make sure that we do not make them again. And we have, of course, still page testability, both test code unit and page testability available for the modern development. And you can now write your tests in other modules, which is a nice separation from your actual production code. And we are still working on improving the actual execution of tests. So we would like to give you a more integrated experience of running tests, so you immediately in the code can run a test and get feedback on it. And this is not the only thing. Clearly, we are not done. Even though we are releasing now, we have more stuff we would like to provide in the future. So, what is next? Of course, we need to add .NET Interop. We know that. And we want to improve the testability experience. We would also like to provide you with even more editor features. VS Code recently added a multi-project feature, which we would like to uptake, so you can actually have, within the same VS Code instance, have multiple modules available. So clearly we have a lot of stuff we still want to provide you in the future. So we have a demo. This is the last one, showing off some of the stuff that we will add in the future. And if I can get out of this, yeah. So what I have here is a very, very small code unit, and I have a calculator code unit that has the add method. So, and if I use F12 just to get into the add method, I would like to add some more functionality here. What if I would like to actually add 3 numbers and have the same method? So let's throw in a couple of other add functions in the same code unit. We have a version which takes 3 integers, and we have another one which actually adds text to text. Let me just use the reformat functionality to get it a nice look. If we go back, and first of all, you can see only one of them is actually referenced using the code lens. If I go back to the use here, I can now instead say I want to add wrong place there, add 40, and still I have another version of the add function which is now the one I hit. So this is method overloading. We have had that sort of in the platform functions for a while, but we are now going to support it as well for user-defined functions. And back to Stan.
So, writing new developer tools it's a big undertaking. We are talking about pretty much bringing back the functionality written over several years, now in a matter of a couple of years, 2 years. But we took this challenge as not only a technical change, we wanted to change more than just that. And the main thing is we wanted to change the way we work and the way we engage the community. So in December last year, we as a product team made an important decision to ship a preview of developer tools. And even though we knew it's an early stage and it's not complete, we decided we want to release it and get feedback and really engage with you on an open forum. And that turned out to be a great decision. So thank you all for being part of the community. We can, with clear conscience, say that we had a new member of the team for this last year plus. And we are really overwhelmed by the great feedback we got from all the channels since we released the preview. And as you might have seen, the main forum that we chose is GitHub. We decided that we want a completely open forum where not only we can respond to issues opened by you, but we saw a lot of cases where developers are helping each other out and solving issues as a community. But also providing lots of suggestions for us. So this was a great source of deciding what is the next most important feature that we'll work on. So we would definitely like to encourage you to continue that engagement. And we have a few places where you can contribute and be part of shaping the future of modern dev. The main forum is GitHub. We have snippets and samples there, so you can contribute more of your code of samples and any snippets that you find useful. I think we've had a couple of contributions already. You can also suggest new events there, as this is, as we see, a key part of moving to extensions, is having enough events in the base application. So this is also a forum where these suggestions are very quickly processed and added to the base app on a monthly basis. And then lastly, we went out with a CAL open library, and it started as an initiative to give a way to replace .NET at a faster pace than we can produce new types in AL. And so far this has been quite successful. We've had close to 10 different contributions that were accepted, reviewed, updated by Jesper, and included in the base app. And actually now in the latest developer preview update in November, we are shipping all the contributions from the open library. So this is the first month where these become actually available and part of the base app. So this is really a point in time where we have really open source contributions as part of our base application. So once again, thank you all for contributing, and we hope we will have even more contribution points in the future, and we'll be able to engage you even better. So, thank you.